I arrived at my sister's wedding, gave my name to the coordinator, and she went pale. She checked the list once, then twice. When she looked back at me, her voice barely rose above the music drifting across the garden. "I'm so sorry. Your name was removed from the guest list this morning." For a moment, everything else disappeared. The violinist kept playing. Guests laughed over glasses of champagne. White roses swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. It was as if the entire world had decided this humiliation was just another detail in a beautiful day. I slowly turned toward my mother. She was standing only a few feet away, dressed in emerald silk, watching me with a smile that never reached her eyes. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. Why would we invite someone who was never really family? The words landed harder than a slap. Not because they were unexpected, because they confirmed what I'd spent years refusing to believe. Every birthday I'd planned, every holiday dinner I'd cooked, every emergency I'd rushed to solve, every time, I chose loyalty over dignity. They had accepted my help without ever accepting me. My sister looked away instead of speaking. She couldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than my mother's cruelty. Around us, conversation slowed. A few guests stared openly. Others quickly looked down, embarrassed on my behalf but unwilling to interfere. The coordinator whispered another apology, clearly wishing she could disappear. I felt every heartbeat in perfect clarity. The crisp weight of the invitation still resting in my jacket pocket. The scent of fresh flowers. The faint sound of wedding bells being tested inside the chapel. The sting behind my eyes that refused to become tears. I simply nodded once. "Then let today be the last time you ever have to call me family." No shouting. No accusations. No scene worthy of gossip. I turned around and walked away. Behind me, the ceremony began exactly on schedule. Ahead of me, my silence had already set something much bigger in motion. I wasn't born into their family. I entered it when I was 12, after my father married my mother following years of raising me alone. By then, my sister Emily was already 10, and my mother had spent so much time convincing her that we were one family that I believed it too. I learned quickly that belonging and being accepted were not the same thing. My stepfather was polite but distant. Emily was friendly when no one was watching and cold whenever our mother was around. My mother never raised her voice at me. She simply perfected the quieter forms of rejection, forgotten birthdays, missing photos, introductions that skipped my name, and compliments reserved for everyone except me. I responded the only way I knew how. I became useful. When Emily struggled through college, I edited her applications late into the night. When my stepfather's business nearly collapsed during a tax dispute, I rebuilt years of financial records and helped him recover. Every holiday, every family gathering, every crisis somehow found its way to me because I never said no. They praised my reliability while treating it like an obligation rather than a gift. Over time, I stopped expecting affection and settled for appreciation. Even that proved temporary. The cruelest part wasn't that they underestimated me. It was that they believed I would always stay exactly where they left me, quiet, dependable, and grateful for whatever scraps of belonging they chose to offer. Standing outside the wedding venue, listening to applause drift through the closed doors, I realized something with absolute clarity. They had spent years teaching me I wasn't family. What they had never considered was what losing me would actually cost. Looking back, the wedding wasn't the beginning of their rejection. It was simply the first time they stopped hiding it. The signs had been there for years, tucked inside ordinary moments that looked harmless to everyone else. At family dinners, my chair was always the one added at the end of the table, never already waiting. If there weren't enough seats, someone would casually suggest that I stand until another could be found. No one thought twice about it. When vacation photos were shared, I noticed I had become the unofficial photographer. I was present for every memory, yet missing from almost every picture. Emily had a way of thanking me that sounded more like dismissing me. "You're so dependable," she'd say with a quick smile before handing me another task. "I knew you'd handle it." "Not, would you? Just, you will." My mother mastered an even quieter language. She introduced me by my first name while calling Emily my daughter. She remembered everyone's favorite meal except mine. When guests praised my career, she'd pause just long enough before changing the subject, as though success looked better on someone else. I caught those tiny glances she exchanged with relatives, small smiles that ended the conversation before I could join it, subtle nods that reminded me I was always standing just outside an invisible circle. The strange part was that I never confronted them. I convinced myself that families were complicated, that love wasn't always expressive, that loyalty eventually earned its place. Instead, every favor I did only made me easier to overlook. By the time Emily's wedding arrived, they no longer saw me as someone to appreciate. They saw me as someone who would absorb one more insult, lower my head, and quietly return the next time they needed something. They had mistaken patience for permanence. That was the only miscalculation they would ever get to make. As I walked away from the venue, I didn't feel angry. Anger demanded attention. What I felt was something quieter, clarity. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Through the windshield, I could still see the chapel doors. Guests were filing inside, smiling, adjusting jackets, fixing dresses, completely unaware that the family they admired had just discarded. Someone who had spent years protecting them. My phone buzzed. Not with an apology. Not with a plea to come back. It was an automated notification from the business portal I had managed for my stepfather for nearly 6 years. My administrative access had been revoked at 8:07 that morning, hours before I arrived at the wedding. They hadn't acted on impulse. They had planned every detail. The invitation had been sent to preserve appearances. My removal from the guest list had been timed so I would discover it in front of everyone. Revoking my access before the ceremony ensured I couldn't quietly step away from the business afterward. They hadn't simply erased me from the wedding. They believed they had erased me from their future. I stared at the notification for a long moment before opening a folder I had created months earlier. Not because I expected revenge, because I believed in keeping records. Every contract I had negotiated, every financial authorization bearing my stepfather's signature, every email instructing me to act on the company's behalf, every backup proving which clients dealt exclusively with me and which compliance deadlines only. I had been monitoring. Everything was organized, dated, and completely legal. I hadn't created a weapon. I had created an exit. For years, I had mistaken being indispensable for being valued. Sitting alone in that parking lot, I finally understood the difference. I closed the folder, turned off my phone, and drove away without looking back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering how to save my family. I was calmly preparing to let them face the consequences of living without me. The advantage of being underestimated is that people stop paying attention to what you know. For 6 years, I had served as operations director for my stepfather's company. I wasn't the owner, and I wasn't the public face of the business. I was the person who built the systems everyone else relied on without ever noticing they existed. I understood every contract renewal, every vendor agreement, every compliance deadline, and every client relationship because I had created the processes that kept them running. None of that belonged to me, and I had no intention of taking a single file that wasn't mine. Instead, I did something much simpler. The following morning, I sent a formal resignation to the company's board and legal counsel. I outlined the projects under my supervision, listed every upcoming deadline, and attached detailed transition notes so no one could claim I had acted irresponsibly. Then I logged out of every account I was authorized to access. No deleted files, no missing passwords, no hidden traps, just an orderly departure. That left every responsibility exactly where it legally belonged. There was one detail I knew they hadn't considered. Nearly every major client communicated through me, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned their trust over years of solving problems before they became crises. My personal phone number, not the company's main office, was the number saved in their contacts. When those clients reached out after my resignation, I answered every call with the same calm response. I've stepped away from the company. They'll be happy to assist you through their main office. No complaints. No accusations. No attempt to persuade anyone to leave. I simply told the truth and wished them well. Trust, I had learned, isn't transferred with a job title. It's built one honest conversation at a time. And while my family had spent years believing I was easily replaceable, the business was about to discover that replacing experience was far more difficult than replacing a name on a guest list. 3 days after the wedding, my mother's phone finally started ringing the way I imagined it had during the ceremony. Only now, there was no music to drown it out. One client wanted clarification about a contract renewal. Another was asking why scheduled reports had stopped arriving. A government compliance notice required documentation no one else knew how to prepare. Every conversation ended with the same uncomfortable realization. I wasn't ignoring them. I simply wasn't there anymore. Word spread quietly through the business community. Not as gossip, but as curiosity. Clients who had worked with me for years asked whether I had started somewhere new. Vendors requested my updated contact information. Professional relationships I'd built with patients continued exactly as they always had, except they no longer passed through my stepfather's office. None of them left because I asked. Many left because trust follows people, not buildings. Weeks later, I received a message from Emily.
Mom says you've ruined everything.
I read it twice before placing my phone back on the table. The sentence lingered in my mind. Ruined everything. No. I had resigned professionally. I had honored every contract. I had completed every handover. The only thing that had disappeared was the invisible safety net they never realized. I had been holding beneath them. For the first time in years, they were experiencing the weight of responsibilities I had quietly carried without recognition. I didn't answer Emily's message. There was nothing left to explain. The silence between us was no longer punishment. It was truth. Months later, I drove past the chapel where the wedding had taken place. The flowers were gone. The decorations had long been packed away. Only one memory remained unchanged. The moment my mother said I was never really family. She had meant it as a dismissal. Instead, it became my freedom. Sometimes the most complete revenge isn't making people suffer. It's allowing them to discover, one unanswered phone call at a time, exactly what they chose to lose. The fallout wasn't loud. It unfolded the way cracks spread through glass, almost invisible at first, until one day everyone could see the damage. Relatives who had watched my mother humiliate me at the wedding began, hearing a different version of events. Former clients mentioned my resignation in passing. Mutual friends quietly connected the timing. The question wasn't whether I had walked away. It was why. For years, my family had controlled the story by speaking first. Now they found themselves explaining actions that were impossible to justify. Being removed from a guest list on the morning of a wedding sounded exactly as cruel as it had felt. Some relatives reached out with awkward apologies. Others admitted they had noticed the way I was treated but had convinced themselves it wasn't their place to interfere. I thanked them for their honesty and left the conversations there. Forgiveness didn't require rebuilding the relationship. It only required letting go of the need to be understood. As for my mother, the confidence I had seen on her face outside the chapel slowly disappeared. She wasn't facing a public scandal. She was facing something harder. People no longer accepted her version of who I was. My reputation hadn't been rescued by revenge. It had been restored by consistency. The same patience they once mistook for. Weakness became the evidence that I had acted with integrity when it mattered most. Looking back, I realized the greatest loss wasn't theirs or mine. It was the years spent believing that earning love required endless sacrifice. No family should ask you to disappear so they can feel complete, and no act of loyalty should cost you your dignity. The day I walked away from that wedding, I thought I had lost a family. In reality, I had finally found my own self-worth. And that was the one relationship no one else could take from me. A year has passed since that wedding. I no longer measure time by holidays or family gatherings. I measure it by the quiet mornings. I wake without wondering what I need to do to earn someone else's approval. The business eventually stabilized. They hired new people, rewrote procedures, and slowly rebuilt what had been lost. Life moved forward as it always does. So did I. I accepted an offer from one of the clients who had respected my work long before they knew anything about my family. They didn't hire me out of sympathy. They hired me because they trusted my judgment, my discipline, and my integrity. That mattered more than any apology ever could. Emily reached out twice after that. The first message blamed me. The second simply asked if we could talk. I wished her well but declined. Some conversations arrive years too late, after choices have already become character. As for my mother, I never heard the words I once thought I needed. I'm sorry? Strangely, I stopped waiting for them. Peace arrived the moment. I accepted that closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you build when you refuse to let their version of you become your own. People often imagine revenge as a dramatic moment, when the other person finally breaks. They rarely notice the quieter ending. It's the day you stop replaying old wounds, the day their approval loses its value, the day your future becomes more interesting than your past. Sometimes I think back to the coordinator at the wedding, her face turning pale as she realized what had been done to me. At the time, I believed I was being turned away from a family celebration. Now I understand I was being escorted toward a different life. The greatest victory wasn't watching them face the consequences of their choices. It was discovering that the door they closed behind me was the same door that led me out of a place where I had never truly belonged. And when that door shut, I didn't lose my family. I finally found myself,